Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Now today we are going to talk about the entire DCAS regulation that has been created or drafted as of end of September. And in October they did another version of that, and they are now moving forward to get this to the GRVA in January, where hopefully this will be approved, and then it will give us a little bit of hope for FSD, maybe September 2026, if they can get it into the March WP29 meeting, or, which is more likely, it will go to the June WP29 meeting, and then it will be for January 2027. So I'm not expecting supervised FSD to come to Europe or the UNECE countries in general before January 2027. Now that we got that out of the way, let's address first the elephant in the room. BMW has been granted permission to use the DCAS, the currently approved DCAS that was approved in March of this year, with system-initiated maneuvers on highway, to be approved or to be used on their new car, the iX3. And yeah, I'm curious to see what that will be, but it basically allows the car to do system-initiated maneuvers with driver confirmation being just glancing into the side view mirror instead of having your hands on the wheel. So hands off on highways up to 130 kilometers an hour with just glancing into the mirror to confirm the initiated maneuver. So looking forward to seeing some videos of that to see how well that works. But yeah, unfortunately, Tesla is not doing that at the moment. Why not? Some of you ask. Well, for Tesla, that would mean they would have to create a separate stack, a separate software stack that needs to be able to incorporate all those different items and all those different restrictions that they have, or that the DCAS imposes onto the software stack that they currently have, and they just don't want to litter their software with all kinds of UNECE flags. So for Tesla, it's FSD or nothing, and they are still working on the Article 39 exemption on the one hand, but on the other hand, it doesn't seem like the RDW wants to treat it, because we get zero information on whether that is being discussed, yes or no, but it's not appearing on their agenda for approval so far. So yeah, it's a shame. So I still think FSD is still a long way off for Europe, and hopefully this new regulation now, which is, I think it's pretty much complete, and I like some of the, or most of the parts that are in there, is just going to be a matter of how do they prove that the system complies when it's an AI system that doesn't have hard-coded rules. That still stays a bit a problem. But the new DCAS regulation also works on evidence-based assessment, and that means that if they can prove it with data, even though they don't have to explain the full system, some things they have to do, but if they can prove it with data, then it is going to be okay. It's going to be a long one. I'm diving into the entire DCAS regulation, picking out the most important bits in terms of FSD from Tesla. So grab a seat, take some popcorn, and enjoy it. I will also link some chapters in this video, so you can jump from one chapter to the other. Right, let's dive into it. So let's first go through a few definitions which are still very important. ADS versus DCAS. ADS, Autonomous Driving System. DCAS, meaning Driver Control Assistance System. So autonomous assistance, right? That definition is very important, and that distinction is very important. So only ADS may permit the driver to disengage from the driving task, while DCAS or DCAS is only assisting the driver, but the driver remains responsible in any and all cases. Now, the DCAS shall also be designed to avoid drivers undertaking activities other than driving over and above those permitted for manual driving. So you cannot pull out your phone and start texting. That's still not allowed. And also the system needs to monitor for physical signs of disengagement, but it is currently not capable of detecting the cognitive disengagement. You can still look around, but just watch the scenery and not the traffic, for example. And that is something that a DCAS monitoring system cannot control or determine. Now, another definition here is that the DCAS also has requirements for training material for the driver and messages that have to be displayed and signals that the manufacturers have to create to make the driver aware of what is going on. Right? And I'll come back to that training material later on as well. Now, as for general requirements, again, the driver needs to be engaged and the system needs to make sure that the driver remains engaged. So yeah, hands on the steering wheel or near the steering wheel, the internal camera, the driver monitoring system, that is mandatory for every car that wants to use this DCAS regulation. So that means that the Tesla Model S, the Model X that don't have interior cameras, the older ones, they will not be able to follow the DCAS regulation, even though they have hardware 3, for example. As for functional requirements, so whilst withholding HOR is hands-off request, the manufacturers shall consider this potential reaction time for the driver to respond to a DCA, that's a direct control alert, meaning take over immediately, to hold the steering control. This shall never be assumed to be less than 3 seconds, especially when on non-highways. So it's 1 second on highways, it's 3 seconds on non-highways, meaning they assume that it takes the driver 3 seconds to regain control and to know what is going on fully. So that's again that cognitive thing, or that cognitive engagement that they cannot determine. So they have to make sure that the system has ample or gives ample time for the driver to regain that cognitive engagement, should he not be. Should be, but can't determine it. The vehicle needs to also be adapting its speed in response to road curvature. So that hasn't changed. It has been there for ages now, and it still has that same limitation where it is not allowed to unintentionally cross a lane marking, for example, because of the inappropriate speed in a bend where the car would just veer off and then it would go into oncoming traffic. So it needs to slow down enough. Now, of course, if it doesn't, then the system may exceed the specific value while not exceeding 3 meters per second squared. So that's 0.3 Gs rounded off, which is not a lot. It's like driving like a grandpa at that point. So it's not really great. But why does it say it can exceed the specified value when it's still 3 meters per second squared? Well, the specific value, if you go back to the previous one, it says it needs to be specified by the manufacturer and it needs to be less than 3 meters per second squared. So the manufacturer can actually determine that it has to be less than that. And then it can exceed that acceleration, that lateral acceleration there. So it can also not exceed it by more than 40%. As a manufacturer, you kind of have to be stupid to say I'm going to go for less than 3 meters per second squared, because that's the maximum allowed limit. So why not just stick to that limit? Now, for DCAS, there is increased lateral dynamics allowed. So the feature may be permitted to induce higher lateral acceleration values than 3 meters per second squared. Great, awesome. When? Well, it has to provide visual information on upcoming situations. There is no disengagement warning given to the driver. The system operation remains predictable and controllable. So if it makes a mistake, it can correct itself. So that is really great here. The vehicle is traveling at a system-determined road speed or below. It cannot speed, of course, sounds logical. And the driver is not determined to be motorically disengaged, because it can still reach the system boundaries and then the driver has to take over at any time at that point. So sounds logical to me, and it does allow it specifies the M1 and N1 categories, which is the just general road cars. It's not trucks, for example. So yeah, I mean, it opens a back door to be able to make sure that it still can get itself back in line by temporarily and very briefly moving the acceleration needle a little bit higher to make sure that you stay within your lane of travel and don't cause an accident. So yeah, awesome. Now let's talk about the virtual rescue lane. So this is something that actually is mandatory already within 10 countries at this point, and some other countries, they have the you have to give the right of way to the emergency vehicles, but that can be on an ad hoc basis. So last minute you see the vehicle coming, okay, you move over so the vehicle can pass. But in those 10 countries, it is mandated by law that you form an access corridor. And that access corridor kind of looks like this. So the left lane goes to the left as far as possible, the two right lanes, or a single right lane if it's a dual lane way, they have to move over to the right. So there's like in the middle lane splitting, you create a virtual lane so that ambulances, police, or tow trucks, they can pass quickly and get to the accident as quickly as possible, potentially saving lives on the one hand, but also making sure that the road is cleared as quickly as possible and traffic jams are minimized. Now, it needs to leave sufficient lateral and longitudinal distance to road boundaries, vehicles and other road users. So that means that it cannot crash into things, obviously. So it's kind of funny that they do have to make sure that that is in the regulation. But it's there and it's a good rule and it doesn't impose anything specific. So I have no problem with that. Also, the vehicle shall return completely to its original lane of travel when the situation is resolved. So that means in traffic jams, if the traffic jam gets dissolved, then you go back into your own lane of travel where you should be. It's only logical in that sense. As for maneuvers, well, the maneuver shall only be initiated if driver is not detected to be disengaged and has commanded the system to perform the maneuver, or has acknowledged it, or is given sufficient notice. So driver initiated, driver confirmed, system initiated. So those are the three levels that are in this regulation. When we talk about auto lane change, well, the auto lane change is kind of a weird one because, as you can see here marked in yellow, it first talks about when there is no vehicle detected, the system shall respond as follows. And then it says the approaching vehicle in the target lane. There was no vehicle detected, so which target lane are we talking about? So this is the thing with this regulation. So the things that you see also here on my screen, which are in bold, those are the new items that are being added. And the system or the regulation is still under revision. So they have to submit it for the January GRVA, but in the meantime, they can still change it and modify it. So I think this will still change because it does not make sense whatsoever on this specific regulation. Now, furthermore, on the auto lane change, there is also a regulation or part of the regulation that says assisting lane changes on roads where there is no physical separation or traffic moving in opposite directions. So it's just the dual carriage ways with no physical divider in between. It is only performed to go into a lane change or via a lane where the target lane is not designated for oncoming traffic. So if there's two lanes in each direction, it can perform an auto lane change. If there's only one road in each direction, then it cannot do an auto lane change. So yeah, again, it opens up a bit more for those specific B roads, but not by that much. But again, any improvement is a good improvement. And again, when we're talking about local roads, then that is a different situation that is not called an auto lane change, you're just going to pass other cars at that point. So that's a different statement or a different definition that they put on that. So again, lane changes, they are going to be allowed on roads where pedestrians and or bicycles are not prohibited. Now that is also a difference compared to the previous regulation, or the current regulation, I should say, where you have to have a physical divider between both ways of travel, and cyclists are not allowed to be on that road. Even if it's a separate cyclist path, it's still, the cyclist is part of the road system at that point. So that is now being changed. The pedestrians and cyclists are allowed to be on that road. So that is definitely an improvement. And again, it allows for more roads to get the auto lane change feature, which is awesome. Now we still have the 7-second rule, but there is like a backdoor built into it. The reason why there is a 7-second rule is, well, I'm sure you've all seen many drivers that are actually going miles on end with their blinker on, and you just don't know, are they going to change or not? They suddenly could veer into your lane, and they've signaled. So yeah, this is what they want to avoid. So you make your intention clear. If the intention of changing lanes cannot be done within the 7 seconds, then it is being cancelled. That's the problem that we have right now, because, well, it still is a very narrow window, and you have to guess it right. Now, of course, if we talk about system-initiated maneuvers, then the system can guess and calculate what a proper window is, and then initiate it, and within that 7 seconds, you will actually be able to go into that target lane that you intended to do. So for system-initiated maneuvers, it's not that relevant, but here we have the back door open to say, okay, if there is no violation of national traffic rules, so if there's no rule in the law that says it needs to be terminated within 7 seconds, then sure, you can drive with it for ages if that is what the law says. So yeah, it opens a back door to those semi-automated lane changes, which is good. Yeah, I like it. Now, also, those 7 seconds and those lane change items or lane change requirements, they still remain the same. So that means, as I've explained in one of the first videos I made about the regulations, if you are driving at 120 kilometers an hour, there's a car coming behind you at 130 kilometers an hour, then you need a gap of 35 meters behind your car to be able to make that lane change. And in front of the car, it's more like 10 meters or something. It's a lot shorter. But yeah, that's a big gap. And in busy traffic, in a small country such as Belgium, it is nearly impossible to do that lane change during rush hour, for example. So yeah, system initiated is the way to go to guess that. But on the other hand, sometimes you have to indicate and wait for somebody to allow you to get in, and they need to know that you want to get in. So those 7 seconds are just too slow or too narrow of a window to be able to complete that. But again, that's my opinion, and I don't think that it is feasible, and it should be extended. And maybe because it's not in the regulations specifically mentioned that it needs to be 7 seconds the most, then yeah, the back door is open for this one. Now, other maneuvers that the car can do is, of course, you can select a lane where the maneuver is neither following the current lane nor travel lane, nor lane change. So that means it can navigate roundabouts by entering, navigating the roundabout, and exiting the roundabout. It can navigate around obstructions in the lane of travel, so potholes, debris on the road. It can do that, and it's allowed to do that, which is great. Provide sufficient lateral distance to safely pass an object, for example, a cyclist. In Belgium, I don't know about other countries, but in Belgium you need 1.5 meters between the car and the cyclist, which is a lot, and most drivers don't do that, but it is the law, and the system wants people to wants the cars to follow the law. So yeah, that is something that I don't know if they can do it purely with AI or if that would require some hard coding somewhere. Maybe if everybody's doing that and the training data is good, then it automatically says, well, this is the way you have to pass it with enough safety distance. But yeah, we'll see how that works. And well, probably we won't see how that works because Tesla won't tell us how they do it, but we'll see if it works. Let me put it that way. It can take turns at an intersection, so it's allowed to do that. Local roads, turn right, turn left, crossing lanes, and so on. But it's also allowed to make a U-turn, for example. So that's great. And then, of course, depart or arrive at a parked position. That is also great because that is what we see in the US as well. So you just parked, you turn on FSD, it leaves the parking space, and at your destination you can now choose where it needs to park, in the street or on a parking lot. It is still not the banish thing where you send off your car, you get out, you send off your car to find a parking spot. It is not that is allowed because that falls under the remote control procedure, which is still under, I think it's Rule 71. Nothing has changed on that. So that's still the stupid 20 meters that we have there and nothing more. So yeah, we won't be getting improvements on that level. But again, it's a gimmick. I would love to have it, of course, but yeah, the most important part is the autonomous driving or the supervised full self-drive that we are all longing for to get at that point. Now, other maneuvers. So in the event the system detects that it has entered into a restricted lane of travel, it shall propose or perform a lane change procedure to an appropriate lane of travel. Sometimes roads split up and you have like a bus lane or an HOV lane where you shouldn't be in. Well, with an EV, I guess you can be, but we don't really have those lanes here. But for example, a bus lane, you cannot be in that lane. Okay, the system will transfer you or suggest you to transfer to the appropriate lane at that point. So yeah, great. It can navigate around an obstruction, as I mentioned before. So driving around stationary, obstacle, a parked vehicle. So that is not considered to be an auto lane change at that point. It's just driving around an obstacle. So hence the difference in requirements and the difference in definition earlier about the auto lane change not allowed on dual directional roads, or how should I call it? Debris, potholes, that kind of stuff. It can pass very slow moving vehicles or road users with sufficient lateral distance. Again, the cyclists, so they are repeating this. And then the maneuver instructed by legitimate external sources, static and dynamic road signs. Yes. Road works, right? Trucks are in the road with those arrows pointing you to move over several lanes. Yes, absolutely. But of course, also emergency and enforcement instructions. So that again is also something that I mentioned from the beginning. If we have a semi-autonomous system, it needs to be able to follow police gestures. If traffic lights are not working, it needs to know that it can go on. And we've seen that in the US already, that it responds to gestures. I have not yet seen it respond specifically to police gestures. If anybody has a video on that, please leave a link in the comments below if you can, or point me to the direct channel or something like that if that's not possible. But I would love to see it where a police is directing traffic and the car is following and disregarding the traffic lights, for example. But yeah, we have seen pedestrians saying, okay, you can go ahead. The car is reacting to that. So yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's very good that it is capable of doing that. But it is definitely required to be able to do that, because those are not real corner cases. You come across those cases more than enough. Another restriction here is it shall not cross into another lane where the direction of travel is in the opposite direction. Remember, to pass general traffic moving at an appropriate speed. Again, appropriate speed is, there's no mathematical formula to it, which is great. That they want to focus on results rather than rules that they want to enforce. Now, what is the definition of appropriate speed? Imagine you have a car going on a road where you can do 70 kilometers an hour. The car is driving 60. Probably they consider that still an appropriate speed and you're not allowed to pass that car. But is 50 still appropriate? 40? Where do you draw the line on that? Sometimes it's easier to have a formula, but it's harder to program it that way. But yeah, if you want to enforce a rule, then what is appropriate? And that might be up to the manufacturer to define what is going to be appropriate, or it's just going to be in the data and the results saying, okay, in this situation we did this, in that situation we did not do that. And the RDW, which is the general homologation body for Europe, they will have to decide whether or not that complies with this regulation at that point. But yeah, appropriate speed, it's a gray zone, and it's a difficult concept to make sure that one time it does it and the other time it does it. System initiated maneuvers, so they need to ensure that the driver has sufficient time to reject the maneuver. Again, it needs to make sure that the maneuver is displayed somehow to the driver what it's going to do. And I think that Tesla has a really good system for that, with the depiction of the cars on the road and the lane of travel and the maneuver that it is attempting to make with a little car that is in between other cars if you want to do a lane change, or the line of travel is depicting that you're going to take that exit, for example. So yeah, Tesla has no problem complying with that. A maneuver shall not be initiated if the system has presented an eyes-on request to the driver in the 7 seconds leading up to the initiation of the maneuver. So hands off, still possible, right? Eyes off, not possible. You still have to pay attention, remember. And with 7 seconds before the maneuver is going to happen, you have to be detected to be able to, or to be attentive to the road at that point. Now, requests for the driver acknowledge that have read and understood the driver information material. So again, I mentioned the training material at the beginning of the video. Well, here also the training material needs to be there, and the driver needs to confirm that he understands that material. So the request shall be given at least every month, but if the vehicle can identify that the driver has previously acknowledged this request, it does not need to be given again for that driver. So it's a one-time thing, but you have to say, yes, I comply, and it should not be a simple like scroll down and accept. You should be able to watch it, and I'm curious to see how Tesla will actually implement this specification, whether you have to watch half an hour of videos on how the system works and how it reacts, or whether you can just scroll down like the most EULAs in software, like scroll down, yes, I accept, I don't know what's in there, but I accept it anyway. We'll see. But for me personally, I would love to be forced to take that course to know what the system does and how it works. From my experience, I know what it does, I know how it works, I do read the manual, but a lot of people don't, and it has to be enforced somehow that they do understand how it works to avoid abuse and misuse. System initiated or withholding HORs, so anticipatory behavior, well, difficult word, in interaction with other road users aiming to ensure stable low amplitude dynamics and or to minimize the risk as appropriate. So the system needs to minimize the risk and be predictable. That is basically what it says, and of course not cause any accidents by abrupt maneuvers. It needs to be able to respond to work zones, lane reductions, lane closures, toll stations, and end of highways. Now again, end of highways, not necessarily a problem, but the system needs to jump from the highway mode into the local road mode, and with all the different definitions that go with it, with a couple more restrictions on there compared to highway, for example. So it can notify the driver if it needs to notify, of course. It can issue a direct control alert to the driver saying, hey, you're leaving this, or you're doing that, or there's a toll station, I don't know what to do with the toll station, you need to take over. Or the system is designed to work with toll stations, and then it can just move on, like we have seen in several Tesla FSD videos, which is awesome. For non-highway operations, it needs to be able to stop, give way, or require to change lanes to make turns and be in the proper lane of travel to do the maneuver that you intend to do. So yeah, that's also awesome that it's going to be able to do that. And from what I've seen on the different videos, Tesla FSD is perfectly capable of doing that. On non-highways, again, the manufacturer shall provide evidence, simulation results, real-world test results, and track test results of the system's behavior in described types of scenarios. So what is good about this is that the simulation results, the real-world test results, they are equal. So Tesla has just informed us that they have a simulator team and they generate data. They have a huge amount of data that they have from the cars. And they can also generate their own world data. So yeah, that's awesome that it can actually do that. So simulator results are going to help us move forward a lot quicker than expecting to have real world results for every possible scenario. The driver unavailability response, so it is allowed to select, or it is designed to select an appropriate target stop area. Right now, it just stops in the middle of the lane with the blinkers on, which is not really safe on a highway. It does draw attention to yourself, of course, and maybe other people will stop and see what is going on here, but it is not safe. People get rear-ended that way. So the system is designed to move to a safe area to the side of the road, so the system-initiated maneuvers will no longer need driver confirmation if it concerns an emergency maneuver at that point. So yeah, that's great and a lot safer for everybody to do it that way. As for speed limits, the car, if you're speeding, needs to give you an acoustic signal at least, and you need to be able to turn it off, but it needs to be turned on with every start of every new drive. So my 2021 Plaid doesn't have it. My wife's 2024 has it. So somewhere in between there, the system has been mandated by the European Union to have that system, or to have that noise when you start speeding, which is very annoying, by the way. The system, when we talk about human-machine interface, HMI, the system shall visually inform the driver and make it comprehensible to the driver. And again, I think that Tesla has a very good system there, where it visually shows you what the car is doing and where it plans to move. And I think it's really good the way that it's doing that. It's very clear to me, even with the blind spot detection. The little thing in the mirrors that a lot of cars have. I think the system in front of me, and yes, I'm talking about S and X, of course. The system in front of me gives me more than enough. And if you use the blinker, the cameras come there as well, depending on which direction you're blinking. And it gives you no blind spots whatsoever on the whole system. So yeah, for me, the way that the Tesla system works is just perfect for, again, for me personally. Your mileage may vary on that one. It also needs to provide information ahead of the initiation of the relevant intended maneuver. So again, remember that 7 seconds, you need to be cognitively engaged again. Well, here, this is the reason why you need to know what the car is going to do. And it doesn't need to be that 7 seconds. They're saying here, again, 3 seconds up front. But if there's a risk going to be involved, like if it's an emergency maneuver, the car is trying to avoid an accident, to avoid a pothole, stuff like that, then the time that it needs to display it up front is minimized and can be less than that. So that's also good that they have that covered in the regulation. Now, when we're talking about eyes on, the eyes need to be on the driving task, and the driving task is not just looking out the window straight in front of you. It is checking your mirrors, but also the instrument panel and the dashboard may be considered as relevant driving tasks. If there's information on there that you need to validate for the auto lane change, for example, or any maneuver that the car wants to do, you need to be able to look at it, understand it. Of course, you are not going to be allowed to drive like 10-15 seconds just looking at that screen. It's just going to take you like 2-3 seconds. to be able to understand what is happening. If not, then it means that it's not clear enough for the driver to understand what it is going to do. So yeah, again, it's great that it's there. That means that you can still change the radio and it will not start beeping at you from the first second that you're looking away. Now with hands-on requests, so again, those limitations are there as well. At speeds above 10 kilometers, you can drive 5 seconds without hands-on. If we're talking about hands-on, right, we want to go to the system where we are withdrawing the hands-on request and have the eyes on only. But if hands-on are required, 5 seconds is what we have, or what we will get. Right now we have 15 seconds for the hands-on request. And then again, after 10 seconds, it will escalate at that point. So after 5 seconds, you get like a message, hey, please keep your hands on the vehicle. After 10 seconds, you start beeping and flashing and doing all those things, where now it's like 15 seconds, and then I think it's another 15 before it starts flashing at you. On non-highway environments, a hands-on request shall be given if the driver is disengaged for more than 2 seconds even. So highways are quite easy environments with not a lot of parameters. Local roads, non-highway roads, they have a lot of parameters. Kids could be running just like that into the road. So you need to pay a lot more attention on those systems or on those conditions and on those roads. So yeah, 2 seconds instead of the 5 seconds there. The eyes on request, again, 5 seconds as well. And again, you get the escalation path with that as well. So you really have to pay attention with this system. And eyes on, again, is not just looking in front of you. You can look in the mirror. You can look at your screen for a few seconds to understand what's going on. So you can still watch your surroundings and be relaxed, and you don't have to stare like that in one direction. So yeah, I don't see any real issues with that. 5 seconds is not a long time, but closing your eyes for 5 seconds at 120 kilometers an hour, you've covered quite a bit of terrain at that point. So it's only for safety, of course. When we're talking about withholding HOR, so hands-free driving, it can be done up to 130 kilometers an hour. It can be done where roads are physically separated, or where there's a physical separation that divides the traffic moving in opposite directions, and where pedestrians and cyclists are not prohibited, and where the speed limit is at least 60 kilometers an hour. I think it's great that they choose 60, because 50 would mean hands-off in urban conditions, and anything above is basically hands-off allowed. So B roads, outside of city centers, there's like 60, 70, 80, 90 kilometers an hour. Those roads are all going to be allowed hands-off driving, which is awesome. And of course, the first system will have hands-on on urban roads, but we'll come to that as well. Because on urban roads, they have a mention, I think it's in one of the next slides, they have a mention that your hands need to be near the steering wheel as well, which is great, because if all the maneuvers are happening quite quickly and quite heavily, the steering wheel is going to turn a lot in urban areas. It's going to be hard to have hands-on all the time and just following that movement. You will instinctively start pulling on it or not reacting quick enough, and then it will disengage. So hands near the steering wheel is definitely a good option for that. So prolonged driver disengagement, the system shall be disabled for a period of at least 30 minutes. So that's your strikes in a rolling time window of 30 minutes. When one, unavailability response initiation, so that's the beeping that you get there. 2, direct control alerts due to prolonged insufficient engagement. So not because the system boundary is there, but it starts alerting you and then says, okay, take over now, you're not paying attention anymore. 2 of those within 30 minutes, you get a strike on that as well. Or 3, engagement escalation requests or request escalations at that point. So Pay attention and everything should be fine. Not paying attention, you will get a strike, and it doesn't matter whether or not you disable autopilot again or FSD at that point and re-enable it like you can do now to avoid strikes, right? It's just counting within one FSD or autopilot session that it's counting, but it is going to be within a 30-minute rolling window. So yeah, it doesn't matter how often you disable or enable it. I think it's a better system. It's going to annoy a lot of people that are not paying attention, but I think it's a better system of measuring, because otherwise you can still cheat on it the way that people are doing now, by just disabling autopilot, re-enabling autopilot, and your counter starts from 0 again at that point. The driver is also deemed to have insufficient engagement if there are repeated eyes-on requests or hands-on requests within a given period. So again, enough escalations, enough messages that you get, and you get a strike. And also, when the system is disabled, you shall receive a request to read the driver information material and reconfirm that you have read it or watched it, and then you can use it again at that point. But that is something that you will have to do that while stationary. So it's the same as the strikes that you have now. Autopilot will not be disabled or will not be enabled for the rest of your drive, and read this and that, acknowledge that you've read it or watched it, and then you can use autopilot again. It is very strict, but I do like it because people are still thinking that FSD is level 4 and they don't have to pay attention anymore, and that needs to be a lot more awareness. And this also ties into the whole system that we talked about in the beginning, where the system has to make sure that the driver does not over rely or abuse the system. So yeah, for me, it makes perfect sense, and I've always been an advocate for giving training to people and making sure that you need to read what you're buying into before you can activate it. Phew, we made it to the end of the document. I know it's been a very long one, and thank you for sticking with me to the end. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And let me know what you think. For me personally, I think this is a very good regulation. I like a lot of it. Some things not so much, but it is open to some backdoors. It is, to me, what I'm seeing here, it matches Tesla's Supervised FSD completely. So that gives us some hope that maybe September 2026, but I would be betting on January 2027 that FSD could hopefully come to the UNECE countries, and finally in Europe we can enjoy a lot more safer cars than what we currently have, which is already one of the safest cars that you can buy. But the way that we drive will transform dramatically with this system, and I'm really looking forward to be able to test it thoroughly, to test the boundaries, and to see how it reacts in all kinds of situations. I have a few tests already in mind, so hopefully next year, it's still a long wait, but next year, this period, if we are very lucky, we can start testing with FSD here in Europe. For now, thank you for watching. See you guys in the next one. Bye bye.